Hi, and welcome to the Functional Relations Podcast. I am Zachary Bird.
And I'm Caleb Davis.
Why is it taking 3 seconds to are you not hearing me in real time?
Sorry, no, I was not paying attention.
Okay. Welcome to the Functional Relations Podcast, where we set aside time to have engaging conversation on relevant topics related to behavior analysis. I'm Zachary Bird.
And I'm Caleb Davis. How you doing, Zach?
I'm doing well. Overall, can't complain.
All right. I'm not really convinced by that, but the way you said that makes me think you're not doing well, but hopefully you can at least fake it for while we're talking today.
Okay, yeah, I'll do my best. I'm really doing fine. This is episode 5, and we're going to talk about social media and its implications for ethics.
Yeah, interesting topic. I like this.
Yeah.
Are you a big
ethics person? Am I a big ethics fan? Yeah.
I was actually going to ask you. I don't think you're a big social media person, right? I don't think you have a big social media presence, and neither do I.
I don't. I've found myself at various times during my life spending a lot of time on social media, and then I've been not that happy about it. And I feel like more and more research is coming out about how Facebook and Instagram and just makes people unhappy.
Interesting. I was having, and again, we're not even going into the meat of what we're talking. It's actually unrelated to what we're really talking about today. But I was talking to my sister yesterday, and she was like, "Why do people spend so much time on social media?" She's actually taking a break from social media because it just doesn't make her happy. And I was like, I think it's because it's low effort to engage in the response of getting on social media and just kind of scrolling through stuff.
Just a flick of your finger.
So it's low effort, but it's also a really low quality reinforcer.
Yeah, right.
So it's easy enough that you'll keep doing it and it'll maintain because there is some reinforcement available, but then you're not really that happy because you're just consuming a ton of low quality reinforcement.
Very interesting. That was
my on the spot analysis. I'm maybe this is what's going on. And
yeah, you're probably consuming a lot of low quality reinforcers, and then additionally, there's every once a day, let's say, there's something that actually is a high quality reinforcer, and it's that variable schedule that just keeps you rolling and scrolling. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So anyway, I guess there are probably ethical implications to just Facebook in general or Instagram in general, but that's probably for them to deal with.
Yeah.
So social media, as it relates to kind of behavior analysis, causes some, I think there's a little bit of uncertainty and kind of opens up a can of worms. Each worm has a little ethical dilemma etched into it. And we're going to open that can of worms today, and we're going to talk about it because it's not easy. I don't believe it's as easy or as clear cut as people often discuss, but there are two main issues that I see the field faces.
Okay.
So the first one, I think, is the dual relationships. So whether it's dual relationships with clients, supervisees, supervisors, colleagues, or peers. I don't even know. Are you supposed to have a dual relationship with colleagues and peers? I don't know. Is that
right? So you're saying like people that you have professional relationships with. Can you be Facebook friends with them?
Yeah, exactly. So it opens up dual relationships as an issue because we know from 1.06 multiple relationships in the compliance code that behavior analysts avoid multiple relationships. So then the second kind of piece that just seems to be something that I think you and I have talked about before is related to Facebook groups, and then how much people should share and things like that.
Yeah, like there's always the possibility of oversharing online.
Yeah.
Like I think there's some really great benefits to online ABA groups.
Yeah.
But at the same time, yeah, like anything, like the same risks that you run with in-person interactions, you can run with online interactions, right?
Yeah.
It's like oversharing and things like that.
Yeah, I would agree that there are a lot of good things that can come out of Facebook groups. In fact, the ABA study group that I see folks who are studying for the exam, the resources on that are unbelievable. Like, and everything's free, and it's like, I'm really impressed. And I feel like that particular group or groups like that are examples of what I think Facebook groups should be used for in our field. I think they're doing a great job. On the other hand, I think we've both seen situations where we question whether that should be online.
Right. Like maybe you have somebody citing an example of a client, not like giving their name or anything like that, but maybe saying, I have a client that does this, any ideas?
Exactly.
And
it's
like, I don't know. I think that's questionable.
Yeah.
I think definitely.
Yeah, we'll deep dive into that later on. So we have these two issues. One, dual relationships. Second is kind of oversharing, or how much to share and who to share what with and all that. So I think those are kind of the ethical situations that are related to social media. So I'm going to go out on a limb, Caleb, and I'm going to tell you something that I'm not convinced by the argument that, listen, I'm not convinced, but I'm willing to be convinced. At the end of this episode, we'll come back and we'll see if I've been convinced. I don't really hold strongly onto this belief, but my belief is that friending someone on Facebook isn't actually a dual relationship. Like, I know they're called friends, but I don't believe they're friends.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're really you're setting yourself up there when you're trying to say it's not a dual relationship when it's actually titled being friends with somebody. And if it's like...
Yeah. I mean, so here's my argument. My argument is that, yes, other than that particular label of like calling it a friend, everybody knows that you're not really friends when you're friends on Facebook. Like, everybody knows that, right? So the argument is that if you were to come across people in real life and they overstep the bounds of your relationship, it starts to creep into a dual relationship where you're like, oh, does this person not understand I'm a professional or whatever? Then you take steps to kind of make sure that you're always being professional and that they kind of understand the line, I think. And I don't see why that would be any different online, right? So imagine I'm in a professional meeting and I'm sharing a picture of my very cute dog. Now, if I am friends with that person on Facebook and I share a very cute picture of my dog, the same sorts of things can occur. Like, someone can comment, someone can say, "Oh, that's so cute," just like in the meeting.
They like it.
Yes, they say
they just put their thumb up in the meeting. Everybody likes it.
Yes, yep, that's right. And some people heart it; they just love it. And some people,
oh yeah, there's so many options now on Facebook. Some people they start crying because they're laughing so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think I've really ever seen anybody do that.
And that's the difference right there.
The primary difference between social media and real life is emoticons.
Yeah.
Because emoticons are not real.
Emoticons or emojis? I thought, what's the difference?
Oh, shoot.
Is emoticon even a thing? Or are you just...
Is that a thing from like the 1990s?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's an emoji.
Don't worry. We got the internet. Here we go. The word emoji is a combination of Japanese word e, which means picture, and emoji, which means character. An emoticon is a representation of a human facial expression using only keyboard characters such as letters, numbers, and punctuation marks. Oh, so emoticon is like before
when you text, like when you were doing texting,
yeah,
and you couldn't
like the colon parenthesis to say how happy you were.
Yeah.
All right. Well, anyway, we got that figured out. So where were we? What were we talking about?
I don't know, but so anyways, it's emoji, right?
I guess so. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, right.
Unless you're on your Motorola, like we use emojis now.
Oh yeah, my what was it called? Razor.
Yeah.
Moto Razor.
Yeah, unless you're texting on your Razor using emoticons.
Okay,
we're all
whatever.
Yeah, okay.
So anyway, my point was that I'm just not convinced that I think you can avoid dual relationships and be friends or connected on social media in ways. And I am interested to see if this episode convinces me otherwise, because I just believe that if someone were just same way as like in real life. So we've had people, right? Caleb, we've had people who kind of, when we work together at different points, we've had people who we come in contact with and they've kind of crossed the line with us, right? Like there's been this person who kind of came into our office, hung out, sat on our couch, and we were just like, this person doesn't understand that we're not friends. And so, we took basically the necessary steps. We kind of like made very short conversation. And then the person was like, oh, okay, yeah. Well, see you guys later. And it's like, okay. So we handled the situation in a way that I think was professional. But the same things can happen in online life, which is that people overstep their bounds, and you just have to, if they comment something that's too personal or whatever, you just manage it.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think in some ways it depends on the nature of the professional relationship. So, for example, I can't imagine a situation where I would accept a friend request from a current client. Like if a parent or something like that, I wouldn't accept a friend request from a parent of a client.
I wouldn't either, but my question is, yeah, I do draw the line there. I do.
Right. So I think there's something about the nature of the relationship that does matter, versus, I don't know, like colleagues. I think that's different.
Okay. Can you have dual relationship with colleagues? That's what I'm wondering. Is that fine? It seems fine. Like, to me, if you're peers, there's no power differential, and that seems like the problem with dual relationships. And so, like, okay, for right now, can I be your Facebook friend, Caleb?
No,
because we're colleagues.
I just unfriended you right now before this episode. I wanted to make sure we were setting a good example.
Well, okay, thank you. I respect you for that.
Yeah, I also unfollowed you on Instagram.
It's great. You're not going to see any beautiful photos anymore.
Yeah, it's too bad, really. But, got to manage those dual relationships. But, no, but I think it's fine. I think it's fine to be be Facebook friends with colleagues. I think that's fine. People do it all the time. I don't think that's a problem, and I don't see how it really affects any sort of... I don't really see how it is unethical. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't either. I just don't know why the BACB guidelines says specifically like just no dual relationships. That might go back to, check out episode 1 related to what Dr. Chase was talking about. Maybe there's opportunity for more broad understanding of that.
So thinking about colleagues, right? Because I do think that we just established that I think that there's a difference between clients and maybe colleagues, right? So that's like an extreme example. Two ends of like the professional relationship spectrum. But I think it's fine because even I haven't worked for a company that they don't do things like team building and stuff like that, which
right.
I think that that's just like, you're just trying to be friends with people. Like that's what it is. It's like, all right, everybody, we're all employees, but I want you all to be friends. So so things are going to be more teamy around here. Like that's what it is. And so I think that if you do things like going out and having like a social night with your team, you definitely should be able to friend them on Facebook. Like,
yeah, I mean, the idea of the team night is to create dual relationships.
That's right. It's like everybody, we get a sense people don't like their jobs that much, and it's because there just aren't enough dual relationships around here. And so,
exactly.
yeah, I mean, that is what it is. And like, I haven't worked for a company that hasn't done that.
But then that's kind of the like safe side of the spectrum of dual relationships, I think. And then you have like when we're talking about clients, adding clients on Facebook. We talk about Facebook. I don't think people use Facebook as much anymore, especially the younger listeners are going to think we're old for talking about Facebook so much.
Yeah. Like all the grad students right now are like
what these old fogies are talking about Facebook. Okay. So when we talk about Facebook groups, so beyond the kind of dual relationship stuff, Facebook groups, there are some that are very beneficial, and there are some that are, in our opinion, very questionable.
Right. Let's maybe talk about what are the things that online ABA groups offer that are great? Like, what are the appropriate, really nice things that come out of online Facebook groups?
Well, I think that number one, I think I mentioned this before, the ABA study groups, I think that those are good. They help people pass the exam. They have lots of free resources. I think that those are good.
Okay. I think like recommendations related to resources. So books, like textbooks, journals, things that people can use to, do research related to topics. I think that's good.
Yeah, like if you want to know more about delay discounting, hey guys, can you give me some seminal articles on delay discounting? Sure. Yeah, and that's a great use of it, right?
What are some other? I think there's like advocacy is good. Right. So when you think about like building a community, communities can lead to advocating for specific things in the field of behavior analysis.
Or against other things. So I feel like I see things like, there's like behavior, I don't know what the exact group is called, but it's like behavior analysis against pseudoscience or something like that. And it's like, it's advocating for science-based intervention, and it's advocating against and pseudoscientific stuff. And so being informed about that stuff is a very good, I think using a group like that is a good way to get informed about those type of things.
Okay.
Also like legislation. So that's another thing, advocating for certain type of legislation in your state or whatever. I think this is a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's a big one, especially when you think about, getting things like insurance funding passed, like any of that stuff. When think about like
exactly,
so there will be jobs available, and also so people that need services can get them, right? So like those go hand in hand, right? So advancing our field and our science requires people to help, and those people have money and funds to pay for it.
Yeah, exactly. I think that those are all good uses of Facebook groups or social media groups for our field.
So those are like I think the good things and the beneficial things that come out of these online ABA groups.
Right.
Have you experienced things that maybe like when you look at them, they make you cringe a little bit?
So I think one of the concerns I have with kind of some of the Facebook groups is like, we have a lot of people that are working with clients who have very specific types of diagnoses, very specific types of problem behavior. And we have clients that are really unique. And if we have people who are kind of going on a Facebook group and saying something like, have a client has hair pulling type of behavior. He really has difficulty when he's going to computer class. Does anybody have any ideas? Okay. So that's one kind of a situation. Because in your Facebook profile, people can tell, where you're from, and they can tell where you work. Then they can like narrow it down. And I think that, I don't know, it just doesn't feel good to me. Like I don't
Yeah, I know what you mean. With using the example you just gave, I also don't like the idea of people coming to an online group like that to get specific recommendations for clients. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
If I went to a doctor's office or if I went to see my doctor for like something that was bothering me, and then I knew that when I left, they hopped on Facebook of like the physicians study group and were like, hey, just met this guy. He said that when he eats eggs, his stomach really hurts. Any thoughts?
True, by the way.
What's that?
Which is true, by the way.
It's true. I can't eat eggs. But do you know what I mean? Like that would be, I don't know. Like that just seems.
Yeah, exactly. It does two things, I think. One is that it makes it look like you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And maybe you don't, maybe you don't. But what you'd hope is that physician would go to like maybe a supervisor or like a colleague and kind of ask the question and not a public forum.
Yeah. Or maybe like look at some resource about my issue specifically. Yeah. Like recent research on treatment of like intolerance to eggs, or I don't know, like whatever that is. But do you know what I mean? In the same way, like if we were encountering a clinical problem with a student, like if you have a colleague or a supervisor or something like that to go to and get some peer review and stuff like that related to that client, that would be great. Or you could maybe look at the literature and then maybe also look at a recent textbook or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, so there's that. I think someone basically asked the question like, why are you getting your advice from an online chat group? Like, we all run into problems that we don't know the answer to.
Exactly.
And that's okay. So we just ask people, we find the resources, but what we shouldn't do is, in my opinion, and I think yours, which is that I just don't think that it's appropriate to crowdsource specific inquiries related to a specific client. On the other hand, I think we both agree that it could be useful to have kind of a general topic.
Yeah. This kind of ties into the idea of having these groups serve as a resource. You could say, or what you might say is, hey, I'm looking for some recent literature on the treatment of escape maintain problem behavior with children with some specific diagnosis.
Yeah.
Anybody have any thoughts or ideas on that? And then that's an opportunity for people to share what they like know about that.
Right.
But it's not about a specific client. It's just about like, we don't all know like all the recent literature that's out there, right? Because there's a ton of it.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of my main concern. I think it doesn't look very professional, even if there's no HIPAA violation. I think that oftentimes parents are in those Facebook groups and it can be, just think of how you'd feel. The person who you're going to for expertise is essentially going on a group asking like, hey, what should I do? It just doesn't give you a lot of confidence in that person. So anyway, I think that it gives us the opportunity to think about some questions we might want to have more discussion about related to these topics.
Yeah, for sure. Did you have any in mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've had discussion around the distinction between online relationships and in-person relationships, and we have to manage this as it relates to social media. And so I think it's just important to maybe have more discussion around the dangers of these online relationships with clients, supervisees, and then maybe colleagues as well, and just discuss that. What do you got?
Yeah, I think that's good. And related to the question you just thought of, I'd really like to know, and I'd like to think more about like what are the things that can really go wrong, right? So we've kind of talked a little bit about like, yeah, it might be okay under certain situations, but I mean, really thinking about why we should be super careful when thinking about online relationships.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions I have is there, or what are the differences between the way things are handled online versus in real life? So I think you kind of like touched on this, like, can't you just handle things online the way you would in real life? And I think having some continued discussion about what the differences are there would be good.
Yeah. And then as it relates to kind of the social media groups, what are the dangers of social media groups for behavior analysts or RBTs? We've talked a little bit about what our kind of opinions on that, but I would like to get into more like the specific dangers. In the same way we were talking about with relationships, we really should think about what are we putting ourselves at risk with when we have these kind of online social media groups, and how do we alleviate those things?
Right. Hey, sorry to interrupt, but if you're a BCBA and you're interested in getting ethics CEs for listening to this episode, you can purchase them at functionalrelationspodcast.com. Each episode is worth 2 ethics CEs, and you'll need to provide 3 code words when you go to check out. The first code word for this episode is birthday. I wonder what cool gifts Zach is going to buy me for my birthday. 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 I think also thinking about what the appropriate use of these social media accounts could look like. Yeah. So first, like what you said, talking about the dangers, but then also thinking about for people with credentials in our field, like BCBAs and RBTs, like how should we be using these social media accounts?
Yeah. Okay. Let's go chat with some people about it.
Let's do it. Dr. Kelly, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Nice to be here.
Dr. Amanda Kelly, also known on social media as Behavior Babe, is the co-founder and the chief clinical officer at DOBE, the Distinguished Organization of Behavior Enterprises.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you on today talking about social media, something that you're very familiar with. I think we would all agree that it's obviously important to be careful to manage online relationships and social media. And Zach and I have already had some discussion around the distinction between online relationships and in-person relationships. In your opinion, what are the dangers of online relationships with clients, supervisees, and maybe even colleagues?
One of the things that I think about with the environment, right? We talk about the environment, is the environment really doesn't matter to me if it's in person or online. One of the things I've said in some of the materials I've created is that you should consider the online platform as one large coffee shop. You know, it's available to the public. People can overhear what you're saying. Unless you're using very secure, HIPAA protected or encrypted things, it's not very protected. And I kind of liken that to being standing in line at a coffee shop and sort of just chatting with your friend and not being really aware of maybe even who's around you. So I think from a confidentiality standpoint, that presents the same challenge in both environments. And I think we have this false sense of security sometimes when we're hiding behind or when we have that computer screen in between us. When we're talking about relationships with clients, I think the areas where I've seen this be less clear online have been things like groups. So if there's a local group of like, farmers or Journey to Zero Wasters in your town, or maybe you guys are all in a football league or you're on the paddling crew, you might be involved in some sort of collective community organization where you're able to see each other's posts, even if you're not, quote, friends or connected. That has happened, and that can happen in real life too. I was on a canoe outrigger paddling team, and the woman in front of me, we were switching different groups that day. During one of the breaks said, "Oh, I love the summer because I don't have as much work," or "I love spring break because I don't have as much work. I don't have to deal with all these, acronyms and people and psychologists and behavior analysts coming into my school and all these assessments and meetings." And I just got really nervous and was like, "Ha ha ha." And she's like, how was your break? And I'm like, "Oh, it gets a little bit harder." And she's like, "Why?" I'm like, "Well, because all the kids aren't at school, and so we get an increase in services, and I'm a behavior analyst." But I mean, it was just really interesting. We were in a community together. We were in a fun, safe space. We were just, taking a break, talking, really you should preserve your breath between paddling bouts out there in practice. But it was really interesting, right? Like that could happen anywhere. And we were put in this situation wearing one hat, not even realizing that we had even been to meetings before, because you look really different when you're, like a wet rat in the ocean than when you're sitting at an IEP meeting. And so, I think that can happen in person. It can happen online. When we're online, the things to really kind of think about are those, in addition to in person, but are those dual relationships or that can potentially present conflicts of interest. And I think that sometimes people can say, "Oh, well, we're not hanging out. We're just having these conversations online," or "We're not hanging out, but this person connected me to this person," or "They invited me to go to this event online." And I think that's where people find benefit to creating separate personal pages and professional pages. And so you are very clearly wearing one hat versus another when you're engaging in behavior. You make much more clear SDs or discriminative stimuli for people to know what condition we're operating under.
That's nice, because that's actually what you've done, right? You have kind of the Behavior Babe page, which has thousands of followers, and then you have a personal page that does completely separate things. Is that right?
Yes, most people who follow Behavior Babe, they will try to find Amanda Kelly. And so Facebook tells you this really neat or creepy feature, depending, and it says, "You have this many people following your personal page, and all they can follow are public updates." And so I am very careful that none of my updates are anything that's really personal, especially if it's public. And for those people who are both friends of Behavior Babe and Amanda Kelly, they will see that Amanda Kelly posts a lot more pictures of the beach and turtles and rainbows. I fake book just like everybody else. I want those memories to tell me everything was rainbows and sunshine. But you will see overlaps in the sense that my mom and my father are all over the Behavior Babe page. And so sometimes I'll get comments even from a distant relative that's like, "We're so proud of you, honey. You're doing great." And I'm like, "Oh, guys, this is on Behavior Babe's Facebook page. Come on." So there's that.
Yeah. So that's very interesting that you mentioned that, because about online versus in-person relationships and how you think of them as kind of the same. Because Caleb and I were talking in the first segment about how this is how I think of it too, which is that I think maybe people are a little bit oversensitive about the online relationship thing, because what I see and what I do in real life is that, if I go to an IEP meeting and I'm chit-chatting at the beginning, I might show someone a picture of my dog or a picture of my child. And I did mention at the very beginning of the first segment how I'm willing to be convinced that there's some big difference between online and in-person relationships, but I wonder if people maybe are a little bit more sensitive about online relationships than they need to be. And I wanted to get your thoughts on it.
Well, I'm not sure that people can be too cautious online or in person. And To some extent, maybe, yes, you could give me an example where I'd say, all right, that one's a little extreme. But I would often tell people to err on the side of caution. So if in the example of like, hey, it's right before a meeting, we're all just chit-chatting and here's a picture of my puppy. Do I think that that's going to create a dual relationship that will be a conflict of interest? And that's the question. Will it be a conflict? And the answer is no, I don't think so. It's not like you're getting your puppy chow from them and then you're going to go and adopt a puppy from them and that they're going to then need to come over every couple of weeks and see your puppy. And you're only going to authorize services if they tell you your puppy's cute. Like, I mean, you definitely want to be careful not to blur those lines. But in that situation, if you think about our ethical code, what you're doing is establishing rapport, right? You are making sure that there's relationships, that there can be buy-in. That doesn't mean, again, that we're going to go walk our dogs together, but that level of connecting is essential to being an effective and compassionate consultant and behavior analyst. I think, though, the difference is that the environment is available to so many other people. So you have a lot of spectators online. You may only have a handful of people. That doesn't mean do something wrong if no one's watching, but I just mean people might feel that they're being looked at under a microscope, or they might be hypercritical of their own actions or of others' actions because they're worried that other people might see and misinterpret. And so I do see people who are suggesting like, oh no, maybe I need to self-report myself, or oh no, I need to tell somebody that I showed them a picture of my dog. And it's like, well, it's good to be mindful. It's good to be thoughtful. And if you ever think that you have done something that you shouldn't do, I would say go through the code, walk through it, ask yourself what's the potential harm to your client, put protections in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. And if you feel the need to self-report, there are those parameters that are offered by the board. But I think it's that audience piece, and that kind of gets people feeling really nervous.
That makes sense to me.
So do you think that it's then appropriate for you to have colleagues and stuff like that as friends online, being Facebook friends, for example? If it's kind of like all the same thing, do you consider that it's appropriate to, a colleague, maybe a colleague's not a great example, but maybe somebody that you strictly have a professional relationship with, accepting a friend request? Like, I guess that's something we've kind of had some conversation about, and I'd be interested to know your thoughts on that.
I think anybody working in a medical and educational or human service field needs to be really aware that the image that we make available to other people can be interpreted and can be used for the advantage and also as a disadvantage to us helping our clients. And an example I will give of that isn't even, is it ethical or is it legal? The question might be, is it a smart thing to do? Right? Sometimes it might be ethical, or it might not be unethical, or we might say it's questionable. But if it's just not a smart thing to do, sometimes you can start with that question for yourself.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so think about putting like a presidential bumper sticker or a campaign on your car, right? You drive to a person's house and you're going to be providing some services to them, maybe doing an assessment. And the parent has a different viewpoint than you, and they start asking you about politics. And you say, definitely we could have a conversation, or at some other, forum or platform, it might be appropriate. But I'm just here today to help you with, Sarah, and we're going to work on this. Well, that family may be more or less likely, right? If you have things like stating any sort of political or personal position. So I think we are inclined to do that more in a permanent product way online. So here's the pictures of the places I went. Oh, well, she must not be sick because look at all these trips she goes on. Nobody necessarily knows that I went home to visit family. Yes, I went to that conference while I was there, right? You lose a lot of the context, and you're giving people a lot of permanent product pieces of information to interpret how they will. So is it ethical to be connected with somebody that you have a professional relationship with? I mean, is there a conflict of interest? Does it put harm to the client? Does it strain your relationship? Does it help your relationship? Does it blur lines? Does it define lines? Those are questions that I would ask myself. But is it a smart thing to do? And that's going to depend on who that colleague or what relationship it is. If it's somebody that I directly supervise, if I have stuff about my personal life, they are not Facebook friends with me. They can be connected with me in a completely professional platform like LinkedIn, which, ebbs and flows in its value to people over time, but it is a exclusively professional network. So if people say to you like, hey, I want a way to connect with you and I want to stay in touch with you, and we may not even be at this job or this, we might not, how else are we going to get in touch? I will say, you know what, that's great. Here's where you can find me on LinkedIn. Like, I want to maintain those relationships as well. And I don't make any post on there. And if I do, they are strictly professional content.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that I have thought about is, so in real life, you are dealt with handling situations, social situations and professional situations all the time. And if someone was getting too close to you online in the same way that they were getting too close to you in real life, you would handle that situation, right? We've talked before on the podcast about an S delta face, putting on our S delta face, which basically means that extinction is in place for this behavior of getting too social with me. And this is what we do in real life. And so is it possible that we could do the same thing in online life, which is that you have this teacher that you're working with or something that you're consulting with, and you added them on Facebook, and now they're like messaging all the time, and they're like commenting on all your photos, and then maybe then you just deal with it like you would in real life, because the same problem can occur in real life. Do you have any thought about that?
I think my thoughts are going to be similar to a lot of other people and who've experienced situations like that, in the sense that we want to have antecedent manipulations. I want to put in place all the protections that are first going to define the parameters of our relationship. If I'm going to, I wouldn't personally friend a teacher I was working with on Facebook because of all the things that I've already mentioned. Mm-hmm. But if I wanted to have some connection, or it was necessary to be in some group together, I mean, Facebook and other social platforms are constantly changing the way that you communicate and network. I know that there were times that I was connected with somebody and then something changed, and it changed that they could see other things. You know what I mean? Like, you can set
right. Yep.
or certain groups only. But I kind of think too, it's like when we make ourselves available, then people will come and chit chat and sit with us and shoot the breeze. And when I'm online and you're online, like, all of my life is available, or the part that I put online is always available, whether I'm awake or I'm sleeping. And so that S delta face is almost impossible, in the sense, like, I can do a lot of response blocking, right? I can delete you or block you or unlike your comments or hide them or what have you. I could reach out to you directly. But I think the danger is that in an online world, it's also easy for us to forget who we're connected with. And I use the word connected kind of loosely there, right?
Sure.
And so, have we looked at who's there and who knows who and all those other pieces? That whole, like, we're all connected by 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. And it's like,
yeah.
If you live on an island, it's like 2 degrees of Amanda Kelly. So
that's right.
In certain situations, I'm going to be really clear and say I wouldn't have those relationships. But if I found that there was somebody, like a colleague, that I didn't feel was such a concern, and we were connected, and we also maybe had a personal relationship, I wouldn't really just be adding colleagues to add colleagues. And to stop hard feelings, I will tell people, like, hey, this is where I really just post pictures of, like, the beach and stay connected with my mom and, like, my family on the mainland. And if you really want to know what's going on in my ABA brain, like, Behavior Babe puts it out there. I mean, that is me. She is me. Yeah. I am her. Stimulus equivalence there. But I think what's hard for people is having difficult confrontations or conversations. And so it's hard to have them in person. It's, I think, in some ways, harder to have a meaningful one online. And so you don't get to have all those soft skills of, like, hey, listen, I really enjoy your contributions to the office, or I really do enjoy when we go out and we have our work gatherings, like catching up with you and seeing some photos of your dog. But really, I'm the most comfortable just kind of leaving a lot of that at the office and work events. Like, I could say that to you and, like, change my posture and smile at you and come in for a hug when appropriate. Whereas online, you're just like, oh, she just didn't like me, deleted my thing, didn't want me coming to her group. And I feel that gets really misread and can put a lot of relationships in disrepair, or put them in a place where you have to exert a lot of effort to repair them. So just try to avoid.
Like that. I'm not totally sold, but I like what you've said is getting me closer to that point where I will stop adding teachers on Facebook. I'm just joking.
I think you're sold.
You know me too well, Caleb.
Yeah, I think he's been sold. No, I like your perspective on that. I thought that was really nice. It's almost like you're saying, it's probably fine until it's not, and then when it's not fine, it's really not fine.
Yeah, well, you maybe do some. You spoke about antecedents. Do the work up front, so you don't have to repair it later. So maybe that's what you're saying. I don't know.
We've been talking a lot about.
Hold on, she's muting herself while she's laughing.
Oh, sorry,
that's not
I didn't have
good.
my video up.
Now
you're gonna. I will share it.
Everyone. Everyone is gonna think that you don't think our jokes are funny.
Well, I'll send you a separate laughing reel.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. A laugh track that I'm just gonna insert laughs whenever
you want to. Go for it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Caleb, sorry to interrupt.
Oh no, it's fine. No, I was gonna say that we've spent some time talking about sort of individual relationships, but what do you think are some of the dangers when thinking about behavior analysts and RBTs interacting in groups? So there's obviously a lot of like Facebook groups out there for professional behavior analysts, RBTs, maybe students of behavior analysis. What are some of the dangers you think surrounding those sort of online interactions?
The fact that they're available to everybody puts all of us at risk all the time for interpretation and for people to identify or to develop what they think is our perspectives. I think for myself, I have been part of many different groups online, groups looking to hire people, helping business organizations. If you're trying to decide whether or not as an RBT you want to become a behavior analyst, I'm in the confessions page for behavior analysts. I think there are so many groups out there that came from a need of, hey, like, let's figure out what we're all struggling through and help each other. And I love those kinds of endeavors. I think, though, that also speaks to the Facebook algorithms. Like Facebook changed from having these pages like Behavior Babe or other platform, other sites, to really wanting people to connect more, right? When we said connect earlier is loose, they wanted people talking, engaging. And by doing so, again, we're putting every conversation in a permanent product, available to everybody. And I have gotten to the point where I've muted myself, I've snoozed the groups, or I've just removed myself from so many of them. And part of it is my own mental health, like the frequency of seeing things about work or things that excite me, but also give me some anxiety. Like, how am I going to solve this thing? And my friend Laura and I, we joke, we say, oh, we haven't solved the human condition yet. Not today, And I think people are really well-intended in those groups. And I think people are looking for support and they're looking for each other and they're finding a lot of it. So that behavior is getting reinforced. I think when you ask me though about the dangers, it's like, would I want every phone conversation I've had on Facebook? No. Would I want the notes that I wrote my friends in school on Facebook? No. Would I want them on the 5 o'clock news? No. Would I want them in Times Square? No. And I think what people don't also realize is that for me, going through my doctorate is really when social media was kind of my master's and my doctorate coming to be. People who are at different places in their studies are going to have different life experiences with social media being around. And so for somebody where it's always been your norm, you might be able to come and give me advice of like, this is what it's like because it's always been like that. But for someone like myself who came in the cusp of like, I remember cassette tapes and Walkmans, but I also, have the latest, greatest like laptop here sitting in front of me, like MacBook. No, I don't have the best headset. We did talk about that. So you got to like pick and choose. But I think that, the danger is like other people see that. And in some ways we could be seen as people who are bickering with each other, people who are constantly correcting one another, people like the soft skills might get lost in that feedback delivery that we see. People who are responding may not be behavior analysts. They may not be RBTs. There's no way to verify this credential in those situations. The same thing, though, is if you were asking me this about a physician. I just want to make that point. Like, if my doctor was online asking somebody how to deal with my rash that only 2 people had ever had in the entire island, like, first off, there goes my confidentiality, right? Which you may not realize or he may not have thought of. And secondly, like, you're going to find the answer to my medical ailment on Facebook. Like, no. What you will find is access to experts, and what people really should be doing. And we've mentioned this in a couple of articles, co-authors and myself on ethics, is contact that expert, find those people online, use the online world. Like, I literally live on an island. When I was living on the mainland, when I published my first article, but I met everyone on a listserv. It was like a couple of different people. We were all in an email group, and that's how we got in touch with each other. So like, you can connect with colleagues, you can find experts, you can find access to information, you could find new jobs here in Hawaii where everyone's hiring. Like, so much amazing stuff can be done online. I think that there are the dangers that we're not completely considering, though, as people are out searching for those positives. So I would say find each other, find the experts, and take those conversations offline.
Boom. That was good. I like that. I agree with you. So we had talked about the dangers maybe of the online groups, but I think it might be good to point out the usefulness of these online groups. So one of them that I think of immediately when I think of, oh, that's a very good use of that Facebook group. And by the way, we're all talking about Facebook, and apparently we're old if we're talking about Facebook, because that's not really the social media platform that people are using nowadays. The youngins are using other things. They're newfangled.
Like
they're new
Instagrams and their Snapchats.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know. It shows my age, I guess. But the thing that I've thought about with very good uses of Facebook groups is something like the ABA study group. I've seen them give free resources to students, just so many resources available for students who are studying for the exam. And I feel like that's a really good use, despite some of the other uses that might be dangerous. Can you think of are there good uses of Facebook that you've seen, and what advantages do Facebook and services like it offer?
When we think about study groups, yes, they can be really helpful. But again, who's giving me that information? Is that actual information? If you can't show me the original source, is that a 3 to 5 word description of what Cooper and Heron and Heward said? I don't know, right?
Yeah,
so
great. Good point.
You can get slammed with a ton of misinformation as well. One of the advantages or ways I've used the groups have been like being a participant with like the Do Better movement. So Megan Miller, I know you guys also know Dr. Miller, she has put together stuff saying like, look, we're going to have these webinars and we're going to make these public commitments and we're going to use this hashtag. That's really cool. It's not a place for asking for clinical advice. It's not a place for saying like, where do I go to get the best, ABA, degree. It's really saying like, how do we take all this stuff that we're all doing and create something and contribute something versus just chatter about it? That's really nice. And then the group that I started a few years ago, that's definitely morphed now, is the No Straw for Me group, when we were really looking at I wanted to take all the stuff I knew about ABA and wanted to help with all the trash that's showing up on our shores here. And then I thought, I wonder if anybody else wants to do that. And then my friend said to me like, hey, you know how many people it takes to be in a group? It's just 2. So if you start it, I'll join it. There's a group. We all need friends like that. Yeah. So
yeah, that's great.
That group, Behavior Babe has tens of thousands of followers. That group has less than like maybe 600. So it's a much more intimate group, and it's much more interactive, but very focused on a particular application. And it's no longer about straws. To be honest, it never was about straws. It was just about, starting somewhere and then trying to take what we learned to get stronger fidelity and, then generalize and try to get that external validity. And so that group has been a really supportive place. I feel like people are really good supporters for each other. And I see that in some of the other groups online.
Great. Yeah, that's excellent. We thought of also advocacy type things too, which you've mentioned some, and those really good use for social media in general. So
do you think that there's anything else, Amanda, that we haven't talked about that you think is valuable for people to know and think about when it comes to social media?
I think the message I want people to have is it's our duty to disseminate information. That's also in our ethical code. So when we talk about ethics, we're often talking about the negative reinforcement paradigm. Like, I want to make sure I avoid or remove something so something aversive doesn't happen to me or my clients, right? Like, we're always like, I hope I'm not being, I don't want that person to be, it's sort of not reactionary, but we want to avoid this unethical situation. And sometimes by avoiding situations, we also avoid our obligation to participate, to be engaged, to disseminate. And so I just want to tell people, like, please don't be too afraid to engage, and please be compassionate to each other and provide appropriate feedback. Things like publishing, the article that I co-authored was with Megan Miller and colleagues Patrick O'Leary and Missy Olive, The Blurred Lines, Ethical Implications of Social Media.
Yeah.
And also we published, that was I think in 2015, a couple years later in 2018, Michelle Kelly, Dr. Kelly, Neil Martin, Carola Dillenburger, Megan, and myself published on the history of behavior analysis and looking at the ethics of effective dissemination. So there are some guidelines of how, like, we feel you can do that, and how it's evolved from the first article to the second, and how having more conversations with people like you guys here and other people online. And then the other thing is, just remember it's a permanent product, right? So when you go to apply for this job, this next job you have coming up, and you're super excited, and they say, so we know you're really persistent because you didn't pass the BACB exam the first 4 times, but the 5th time you really passed it. That might not be information that you knew that they had or that you wanted them to have. So although 10 years ago you put that online because you were asking for help and you wanted people to congratulate you, and you should be congratulated, and it does show persistence, and maybe there's a test taking or anxiety thing at play here and not a concept issue. But you now have that information living outside of when you said it, and it might be picked up by people you haven't even met yet. So,
yeah, good point.
It's a good point. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. This was a great discussion, and I hope we can have you back sometime. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I enjoy talking a lot, but particularly about topics that are relevant to all of us in our practice, right? I mean, I think that the questions you're asking come from a place of concern and consideration, and we want people to have these conversations. So the more that we can encourage that, I think the more our field will benefit and our clients will benefit. So thanks for being a part of that, guys.
Welcome, Dr. Megan Miller. Thanks for coming to the podcast. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. Megan Miller is a co-founder and the Director of Outreach and Development at Navigation Behavioral Consulting. She also started the #DoBetter movement on social media. One of the things that Caleb and I had talked about previously was that we think it's really important that we carefully manage our online relationships on social media. And we have thought about the distinction between online relationships and in-person relationships. And we were wondering, in your opinion, if you could outline some of the dangers of online relationships, well, with clients, but also things like supervisees and maybe even colleagues.
Sure. So this is an area that I may not have as much input on as some people. I am very careful in terms of professional interactions on Facebook, but I also have I'm very active on Facebook and not really any of the other social media. So Instagram or Twitter, things like that. I was I'm going to state my age here basically, but as soon as Facebook came out, I was one of the first people to join, I'm pretty sure. So I've just been on Facebook for a really long time. So I've kind of seen it ebb and flow there. When Facebook first started, most people that I knew that had it, when it first started, you could only use it if you had a college email address. So that kind of limited things in terms of some of the issues we encounter today. Where you didn't have to worry about clients trying to friend you or anything like that, because a lot of clients weren't even using social media. I have seen different issues with different platforms. So Facebook has been the easiest for the work that I do in Virginia with navigation. We provide a lot of training to our employees about just social media use and things to consider. And one of the things we lay out from the beginning and provide frequent reminders about to both our employees, but also our families, is the potential for a dual relationship for having, friendship on social media. So that's one thing, obviously, with clients that's pretty, I think, cut and dry, easy, right? If it's a current client, you're not friends with them. Just don't do that.
I agree.
So even if you barely post anything, it lays that potential for, we're friends. You're calling it friends on Facebook, right? Yes. So that if you're a client, there should not be any things where there's a friend label involved. So that one's pretty easy. But Instagram, for example, has been a little bit harder because it's a little bit easier for people to follow.
Yeah.
So we have in our Instagram for navigation, there could be clients following it, or even our Facebook page for navigation, there could be clients that like it. So being very careful in those situations, even if someone posts something that's a client, that you're not see you at session tomorrow, or, something like that shows they may make their own statements about the services they're receiving or whatever, but we never comment back and, say anything. That's one issue I see a lot is businesses that will have their Facebook or social media pages, and there's clearly active clients. And it's good from a relationship standpoint in terms of rapport and things like that, having that camaraderie a little bit where they might even respect you a little bit more. But then you start to get into that slippery slope of, what if they make a comment and you don't respond back in the way that they wanted you to? And then all of a sudden in the session the next day, they're being really mean and you don't know why. Right. So there's a lot that can happen on social media where, with the computer, especially, people blow things out of proportion quite a bit. So we try to be very careful. Again, we can't stop people from posting things on our business pages, but we don't turn that into a conversation ever, because again, one slip up in how you say, or maybe you constantly respond and then all of a sudden don't, and then the client gets upset because why didn't you respond?
Yeah.
So I think there's things like that people you have to play out the whole scene of what could happen and not pay attention to just this one piece of it. I think another issue that comes up a lot is with clients, past clients, when is it ever okay, or when is it okay to friend past clients? I've had a few actual clients that I've worked with where I started with them maybe when they were 3 or 4, and then they find me, now they're adults, and they want to be my friend on Facebook. And it's really hard to be no, that I can't do that. I can't be your friend. So, and especially explaining that, it's been great because maybe they're reaching out to me and appreciating what I've done and the work that we did together. And that's amazing. But at the same time, to say, but I can't be your friend here, is a little bit more difficult, I think. So that's all the kind of the big client stuff. I think that one, I don't know. I feel at this point, hopefully most people are aware of some of those potential issues.
Yeah.
Where it gets a little bit, I think, more gray is that supervisee and colleague standpoint.
Yeah.
So The supervisees one, it's so tricky because fortunately I don't supervise, like the people that I supervise, it's remote supervision at this point, and we're not Facebook friends. But when I've worked in like college settings or at navigation in Virginia, when you have varying levels of people, so like I'm your supervisor and maybe I'm friends with some of the supervisors, and then the supervisees want to become friends, and this network starts to build, and that gets a little bit trickier, I think, in terms of how do you navigate that and make sure you're maintaining that supervisor-supervisee balance. I think that's an area that our field really needs to probably have a lot of work, especially some things you can't even help. Like there's so many Facebook groups, even if I'm not friends with supervisees, if I'm posting on Facebook groups, they can see what I'm saying.
Right.
I wondered about that a lot on like the ABA Business Builder page and the Confessions of Behavior Analysis, Uncomfortable, a lot of those different Facebook groups. When I see people post things, I'm like, are other people from your company in here? Because won't they see that? And I know there's like the anonymous, there's the anonymous functions now that a lot of groups are doing, but still like you can see what people are saying. And so you might do a really good job of protecting your identity on there. I've seen a lot of people who have like, they don't put their full name, or they don't have a profile picture that shows who they are, and they try to just be this like anonymous type figure, but people figure it out most of the time, you know? So I think that's one I don't honestly have answers for myself, because I'm pulled in a lot of directions there in terms of wanting to have, again, that rapport and being able to, I live in Florida and a lot of our employees are in Virginia. So if I want to like get to know them, like you would at a normal job where you come to an office and you have like water cooler talks and things like that, I can't do that. That's not an option. So one of the ways to do that is to have some social media interactions, you know, with people that I work with, not clients. Yeah. So it's kind of a gray area for me. For me, what I've worked out there is trying to have, making sure just professionally, we provide this training to our employees as well, but we don't post about work on our Facebook profile. So even if I'm having a rough day at work, like, I have an aggressive episode or something like that, or I'm really stressed about something, I don't make any posts about that, because then my employees could see that if I am friends with any of them or anything like that. And I'm kind of fortunate at this point. I'm not technically a supervisor for any of our employees. I develop like our outreach and remote services. So they look up to me potentially, given my expertise and who I am in the field at this point, but I'm not like directly responsible for their work anymore. Yeah. That makes it a little easier too.
Yeah. I think that's a good point, because it does, when we talked originally, Kayla and I were talking in the first segment about how it seems like there's a power dynamic that really matters, right? So with clients, the power dynamic, you have the possibility of controlling how many services they're getting, or what quality services they're getting. And with supervisee, it's the same sort of thing. You have this power dynamic, and you have to be cautious of how your power is used. I think your situation is a very interesting one, where you're high up in a company, but not supervising people directly. So there's interesting dynamics that aren't necessarily power as we might typically look at them, because you're not supervising them.
I really like the point about not posting about work on your social media, because in some ways I could see how if you are friends with colleagues or something like that, or maybe even supervisees in some situations, that could kind of open the door or signal like this is a forum where we can talk about work, which you want those things separate, right? That would kind of be the idea.
Yeah,
yes,
good point.
Yep. And of course, there's stories when we do our training on this. We will go over, the various people who've been fired from their jobs for posting what they thought were innocent, posts about like whatever, but it was work related, or it had even just, racist comments or whatever. And then they get fired because it's out there. So just being mindful in general, like, if you want to use your social media as a way to vent or rant about things, to take the proper precautions, but also understand the potential impacts that could have. It's not a behavior analytic unique thing. It's just, that's how life is with social media.
That's right.
Hey everyone, it's Caleb again. If you're interested in getting CEs for listening to this episode, the second code word is soap. The stuff you use to clean things with. Soap. SOAP. Soap.
Then the other one was colleagues that you asked about. That one's a little bit interesting. I go back and forth on this one. So I used to be friends with anyone that would send me a friend request. I would accept it, partially out of dissemination purposes.
Yeah,
so
good point.
I just have a personal Facebook profile. I know like Amanda Kelly has Behavior Babe, and different people have like Dia has Behavior Man, and there's different people like that have their different entities or whatever you want to call them. But I'm just me, and I didn't really see necessarily a problem with it in terms of colleagues, because I was just trying to disseminate and get, information out there about the work we do. And I had a friend about a year ago who kind of pointed out that may not be the best idea, because I'm in the public from like doing presentations and things like that now. And I do post personal things on my Facebook about my son and things like that, which again has like a lot of people, they come to see presentations and things like that. And they connect better with me, and I can get more progress with them. And again, they're not my clients or anything like that. It's just more of like a collegial, same as you would see if you were in like a university or an actual office setting where you could actually have interactions with people, just that pairing process and whatnot. But it gets a little bit tricky, because a lot of the times the people that are friending me now, they may have some mutual friends in common, but I can't tell from their profiles if they're even behavior analysts, if they're parents, maybe, how is it that they came to like request me as a friend? So that makes it a little trickier in terms of deciding, like, is this actually, if it's for the function of dissemination and helping other behavior analysts connect with what's best in our field right now, I'm all for being friends with my colleagues. But when I can't make that discrimination, it gets really difficult. So I went through and like unfriended as many people as I could, but I have like over 100 friend requests right now, because it constantly happens that I get requests and I don't know who the people are, but I don't want to decline it because they might be a behavior. And I kind of wait until if I have an encounter, and then I'll go and like confirm it. Or if I don't have an encounter with the person some way in a few months, I'll like decline it or whatever. And I created a Facebook profile page for like my professional work as just Dr. Megan Miller.
That's a good idea.
Hoping that would help, because anyone who truly is interested in the dissemination of the science could like that page, and the same things I post on my personal page about dissemination, I post there. But it's been slow going getting likes on that page, because I haven't done anything to make it like catchy or fun or, anything like that. I've just encouraged people to like it. So it's kind of a slow transition I'm making to try to really pare down my profile to really people that I only know, and try to push people who just want to follow the work that we're doing into the professional pages. On Instagram, I have no idea how that works, to be honest. Like, I created an Instagram because I was told I needed to, but I'm sure I know there's settings you can do and all that kind of stuff, but I have not paid. I barely post on there. And I know there's tons of people following that Instagram, my personal Instagram, that I have no idea who they are.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that one's.
But I don't post on there like hardly at all.
That one's tricky. Yeah, for sure. I think you bring up you bring up several great points, but one of them that you bring up is that it's like a little bit gray, I think, when it comes to colleagues. And what you're saying is that you have a situation where you're not even sure if someone's a colleague or a client parent or and so you have to somehow decide whether because one of my questions is, are we a little bit too sensitive about this? Because, sometimes we're in IEP meetings, and we have people that we're trying to build rapport with them, and we might be like, oh yeah, look at a picture of my dog or a picture of my son or whatever. And we manage these relationships in real life, not crossing any dual relationship boundaries or taking advantage of the power structures that might be in place. And I'm wondering if we could do the same sorts of things online, like we wouldn't want to be friends with clients, and we don't want to be friends in real life, and we don't want to be friends online. But how does that work with colleagues? There's not necessarily a power structure problem with colleagues because we're potentially at the same level. Caleb brought up one time in the first segment about how a lot of times in workplace settings, they'll set up team nights where people are like supposed to go and create dual relationships. Like that's the idea of that of that event. And then sometimes maybe people are saying, don't be friends with people on Facebook that you're colleagues with. And so we're just kind of rethinking how sensitive should we be about this. And I think that you bring up some great points, which is if you can't discriminate who's who, that's even a bigger problem. So that's interesting. We hadn't thought about that one before.
Yeah. For me, from like just more of a sociological perspective, I've found biases that develop, and I have to. So again, it doesn't mean you can't do it, but just being aware of that. So I might become friends with certain colleagues and then see their Facebook posts, and I'm like, oh, I was not aware that those are thoughts you had, and now I don't like you.
Right.
And then it makes it harder to interact, even though, again, they may not be someone I see a whole lot, but maybe they're a president of, one of the professional associations, or I'm supposed to write a paper with them, or all of a sudden they're in an IEP meeting with me or whatever. And to be able to like shut that down and pretend I didn't see their like X, Y, and Z posts that like filled me with rage. Or the opposite. I've had the opposite happen where I don't know anyone at all, but I really like their posts. So now I think we're best friends, even though I don't even know them. And I might overly trust them and think like their competence as a behavior analyst must be great because on like the social media side of things, they seem like a really cool person, which the two have nothing to do with one another, right?
Oh,
so
very
being able to like manage all of that, I think social media heightens that, but that's an issue that comes up anyway. Like if you're at a conference with people or different things like that. So in real life, those things could happen as well, but the probability and the access to it is obviously increased when you have these like social media networks that can like just explode so easily. So that's been one of the biggest struggles that I've had in the recent past is making sure I'm not getting biased about people based on just their social media. And I know the same happens.
It's very interesting.
Because I've been approached by people about various things, making assumptions about like me based on my social media or whatever. So not like negative necessarily, but just, being mindful of that.
Yeah, you have biases that go either way. Very, very interesting.
Yeah, I've honestly never thought about that. I've always thought of like the danger is you possibly become BFFs and then that like biases your decision making, but I've never thought about it going in the opposite way where like, yeah, like you said, they could post something online you don't agree with and somehow that influences your professional relationship. That's really interesting.
Yeah. So when that happens, I tend to just unfollow those people. I don't unfriend them because I don't want them, if they notice, I don't want them to get mad at me, but I do unfollow them so that I don't get like further inundated with posts that I will get mad about.
It's like plugging your ears, like the online version of plugging your ears.
Exactly. Yeah.
And closing your eyes.
But I think another way for the managing it online, which I don't think, I think in the research that's been done, it's not in our demographic necessarily. Well, maybe you all, it won't be in yours, but it's supposed to be in mine, but it's LinkedIn. When you're really wanting to have more of that like professional networking, like making use of LinkedIn. And I think the most recent thing I saw on like who uses which platforms, LinkedIn was more like the 40 to 50-year-old, like most appealing to that age range. Might be 35, which then I would fall into it, but I barely use LinkedIn either. So if people are really wanting to get more professional networking, but they're kind of concerned about those issues we talked about in social media, LinkedIn seems to be a good way to network and have a little bit of pairing because you control what you put out on social media anyway, but LinkedIn is truly on Facebook. I'm posting stuff so my family can see it that don't live here, or friends I have that, maybe want to see my son and things like that. Whereas on LinkedIn, you're not necessarily going to be making those types of posts because those people aren't there. But if you occasionally want to share a picture of your dog or your child as like a pairing type situation, it's a little bit easier to control that and basically simulate more what you were talking about with like those IEP meetings and things like that, where you're developing a positive image of yourself, but it's more in that professional light.
Yeah. LinkedIn. It's one of those sites that people are recommended to use, but really don't want to use. We also talked about good uses of social media, and then there are some that are not so good uses of social media. And we were wondering, do you have any thoughts about what you think the best uses of social media are?
So, I mean, it definitely is an easy way for people to connect with others. Before Facebook was as popular and all the other platforms, I was in a lot of Yahoo groups. And I'm sure before that there were other things, but the outlet's always been there. And it's just a lot easier for people to connect with others in the field and pick each other's brains and network and those types of things. Obviously, it can also be a great way to disseminate, if done properly, information about behavior analysis and the work that we do. So I think that's wonderful that opportunity is there. I think, again, especially if you're a student, but even if you're a BCBA that maybe hasn't just thought about this a whole lot, closely looking at our professional and ethical compliance code and just thinking about the larger impacts and the big picture of how like your behavior, even though in the moment, whatever you're doing may not seem that bad, but like looking at the kind of fallout that could occur whenever it sounds daunting, but basically whenever you make a post. And sometimes people don't care. Like there's certain things. My husband is very guarded about what he'll put on social media. He doesn't put anything professional on there. Personal, same, like barely anything, although he makes a lot of political comments and things, but I don't care. Like there's certain topics that like sexual harassment and like the Time's Up movement, I am vocal about that. And like, you rub me the wrong way on that and I will say something, right? Like, I don't care what fallout happens. I will take the hit.
Sure.
But then there's other things that, you know, maybe I want to try to provide some helpful guidance and things like that. And when I used to I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, when I would comment on certain things, I've kind of gone through cycles here as well. When people first started really using social media in a more of a professional way, I was kind of eager and excited to help people. Like, oh, this is a great way to connect and help people. But then, you know, obviously, Amanda Kelly, myself, and Patrick O'Leary and Missy Olive wrote the Blurred Lines article. And we really like dove in. And prior to that, we had already started to change my behavior in that way as well. But we really dove into like the ethical implications of those types of things. And so then I kind of flipped the other way and like, how dare people ask for advice on social media, you know? And I was like a little bit too hardcore. And when people would comment, I don't think I was mean, but I wasn't maybe as thoughtful and humble in my like sort of responses back in a way to help like shape people and in their future behavior. So that's something I really try to attend to now, even though I might read a post and think in my head, like, what?
Yeah.
How are you posting this?
Yeah.
And sometimes I will just privately message a person
Sure.
and like give them that gentle feedback if it's necessary. But if I decide to make a comment, it's a lot more gentle than it would have been, you know, even a year or so ago, to be more of like encouraging and maybe sometimes even ask questions
Sure.
instead of assuming things.
Yeah.
So I think that's something too for BCBAs and RBTs that are going to use social media and participate in the groups. There seems to be a lot of assumptions that people make. They just read a post and like assume a lot of stuff and then make their comment based off of that. My three biggest pieces of advice would be, one, if you are in a situation where you're needing resources or you're not sure what to do about a client, we've all been there.
Yeah, for sure.
And it is a great way to network and like get access to those resources, but just be careful about how you pose those questions. Don't just go to social media and ask a question like you would to a supervisor, you know, hey, I have this client, what should we do about X, Y, and Z?
Yeah.
Instead, say like what resources you've looked at already and like what types of resources you're needing, and ask a broader question. Hey, I'm having some issues with toilet training. We've tried X, Y, and Z. Does anyone have resources or recommendations, you know, when those things don't work, or something like that, as opposed to making it so like client specific. That would be one of the things. Then if you're a person commenting on those posts, making sure to, again, don't just make assumptions and like post a bunch of stuff, but don't give advice either. So, which I always catch myself doing too. Like I have to be really careful because it's just, we want to help each other,
Yeah.
which is great. but we're not in a place ethically to give advice. We don't know the full picture. Even if they put, a whole paragraph explaining the problem, we still have never seen it. We've never reviewed the data. They're not our client. So take whatever advice you might have and put that more into like here's some resources you could review, or here are some people you could contact, or I could set up a time to chat with you, as opposed to putting it as like a comment that people could read and misconstrue. And then the third thing with that would be, if you're commenting, be mindful of your comments and how they could come across. Like, be humble, be nice, but also think about the fact that like non-behavior analysts may read what you say, and don't be like a jerk because we already have that reputation. And if they see us being mean to each other, that's not going to be very helpful. I don't know if this has been discussed yet when you all have talked about this, but our ethical code talks about public statements. And I think a lot of people kind of miss this. So 8.0 public statements talks about how any statement that's made relating to professional services, products, or the profession of behavior analysis counts as a public statement, and you have to comply with the code. And it specifically identifies as an example social media. So when people are in these professional Facebook groups and whatever they're saying or how they're saying it, technically, if you're being deceptive, or, if you're not having integrity, or you're not providing a best image of the science, you're technically in risk of violating our code, which is, you should be nice anyway without having to have this extraneous thing on you. But that's another, like, if you need another reason to kind of monitor what you're saying. Now, obviously, if you're posting in like a Facebook group about Ohio State football or something and has nothing to do with behavior analysis, like, say whatever you want. But when you're clearly representing the field and the profession and talking about behavior analysis, it is an ethical duty to, make sure that we're providing a positive light within our interactions.
It's a great point.
Yeah, that is a great point. We didn't notice that, and we haven't looked at that specific part of the code, and that's just an excellent reminder. One thing I was thinking about as you're talking is I really appreciate your openness and your honesty about how some of these issues are a little bit gray sometimes, and you've kind of gone back and forth even in your own life. And just being open about that is really a really refreshing thing to hear from someone like you, to say that, like, we all don't have this all figured out. This is why we're having these discussions. In fact, we create this podcast as a way to have discussions with people about topics that we think are important or maybe under discussed. And I think that when people listen and they hear that you're thinking, okay, well, sometimes I felt like I commented too much, or sometimes I felt like I came across not the way I wanted to, or whatever. This is a very important thing for people to share. I personally thank you for that.
I also really think ethics is like a scary topic for people. So whenever you bring up ethics, people kind of get a little freaked out. So I think that's also where I appreciate you kind of being open about that, because everybody doesn't always know what to do. And we probably have all done some things that maybe we then change our behavior because we don't agree with it entirely. So I think it's good to kind of be honest about that, and I think that makes ethics less scary.
Yes. And I mean, the code, it's, there to help us determine how we're going to respond to things. And a lot of it, there are things that are intuitive, and you just know, like, we don't do that. Like, don't have a relationship with the client or something like that. But there's other parts of it where even, I went to FSU. I had Dr. Bailey as my professor. I've presented on ethics for 12 years. And even then, I still have to review the code frequently for presentations that I do and discussions that I have. And sometimes the interpretations, they're going, hopefully, your cost benefit analysis and how the pieces are interacting with one another are potentially changing depending on the situation as well. So it's one of those things that I think sometimes people, it's almost like an avoidance tactic. Like, well, if I just don't look at it and I don't talk about it, then I can plead ignorance, like, no, like, it's better. It's uncomfortable, but it's better to recognize, oops, I shouldn't have done that. And I wasn't aware, I was previously ignorant, or I had forgotten about that part of it. And now I need to commit to changing what I'm doing. That's obviously preferred to just avoiding the situation altogether.
Yeah.
So
that's good. Yes. I think that's exactly right.
Megan, is there anything else you kind of wanted to describe about this topic, maybe that we didn't talk about already?
Yeah, one thing I was thinking about that that I don't know if I made clear enough in terms of the benefit and the resource side of it, and I don't want it to come off the wrong way. So I identified like the certain groups like ABA Business Builders and Confessions and Uncomfortable. We have one for the Do Better movement as well. And I provided some of like advice on, what to do or not to do in those groups. But one of the huge benefits is for each of those groups, you do have experts at your fingertips that you wouldn't otherwise have access to. The Business Builders one has been especially helpful, like just this week where there was something that one of the people at Navigation had a question about, and I just like type it into the search box. The search box is your friend, make use of that thing. And then all the posts on that topic come up, and I have much quicker access to problems that you can't find research on, that, are business issues that people are encountering. But other people have already encountered them, thankfully, and they've had those discussions in that group. So you can see what other people are doing and what resources they're using. And there literally is no other way to get that information, right? Besides other people's experience, because we're growing as a field right now in a way that is unprecedented. So if that Facebook group didn't exist, there's so much information that a lot of us, whether you own a business or you're responsible for like helping to operate one, you get so many more access to resources that you wouldn't otherwise have. And Becca Tagg and Shannon Biaggi, who've been running the group, do a phenomenal job of sharing their own resources and helping people like not recreate the wheel. And that's not the only one. There's tons of different groups like that, but I did want to make sure to point that out, that there's a lot of unique resources within each of these groups where if you can commit to being humble and human, like we try to in the Confessions of ABA group, then you will hopefully benefit greatly from those resources.
Caleb, so that was good. We had some great discussions on this important topic.
Yeah, for sure. Dr. Amanda Kelly and Dr. Megan Miller were excellent guests, and they provided some really helpful and insightful information on the topic of ethics in social media.
Yeah. I thought, going in, before we asked them, I was thinking, who would be great for this episode? Amanda and Megan. And guess what? They were great.
They delivered.
Yes. Thank you to them for chatting with us. So let's jump into the questions that we had originally asked them. What are the kind of dangers of online relationships with clients, supervisees, and maybe even colleagues? And whether colleagues, whether that was an unethical danger or not? What do you think we came up with?
Yeah, so I think all of us, everybody who's talked on this episode, agreed that it's probably not a good idea ethically to have online relationships with clients, right? So probably if a parent of a client sends you a friend request, probably shouldn't accept that. I think that everybody was in agreement with that.
Yeah, I just think there's too many dangers with that, right? There's just too many people really looking up to you as a BCBA, and they want to be your friend. They want to get close to you. And, we just have to keep that professional distance, I think.
Right. Something I thought was interesting was when Megan brought up a situation that sometimes happens where if you have a business, right? So you have maybe an ABA agency that has a Facebook page, parents might follow that page.
Sure. Yeah. And that's something you'd want them to do, follow the page, because it's like advertising.
Right. But something that I thought was interesting about that, and I think smart, is that even if the parents commented or made comments on the company page, the company wouldn't respond, right?
Yeah, it was kind of like just a cautious approach. She did mention that it's possible that you actually help the relationship by commenting and saying, "Oh, thanks, blah blah blah, love whatever," but there's a risk with it too, which is that you end up with this dual relationship. And so it has its pros and cons, but that was their particular agency policy.
Yeah, and I think that's good to have a policy like that, just so you're, it's consistent, right? Because she mentioned that, like, one thing that could happen is, like, if for some reason, like, let's say the agency usually replied, but sometime they didn't, the parent might, possibly be upset by that. And that could have a negative effect on the relationship, even though you haven't really done anything wrong, right? Like, it's just maybe not responding to a comment.
Yeah, that's right.
So I think that was good, because you could think that, or at least I might think, like, oh, that could be very harmless. But even things that seem very harmless, little things, there's always a possibility that could be an issue.
Yeah, and I think Megan mentioned how she sometimes will get past clients who reach out to her, and she doesn't accept those friend requests after they've discontinued services and things. So,
right. Which, I mean, I think that ties into what Amanda was saying, because she was saying you can never be too cautious, right? So even if something might be fine, like, it's probably best just to err on the side of caution, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, what Amanda was like, is it unethical? I don't know, but is it the question is it smart, right? And so I thought that was that kind of summarized to me the whole issue in some sense.
Right. So there are also some dangers and considerations with being friends with supervisees and colleagues, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so one of the things that Megan mentioned that I thought was really interesting, that at least I can't remember that we had talked about, was how bias can go both ways, right? So if you're friends with someone, it could make you have this really close connection because you guys become BFFs. But then there's this flip side, which is maybe you like see something you can't unsee.
Right. So, yeah, like somebody on their social media seems really cool and awesome, and so you assume that they're going to be an awesome behavior analyst, which may not be the case.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
They may be a really cool person with not the best skills, but you may overlook that due to your connection with them on another level.
Yep. And then also, essentially, if you see something on their page that is unsavory or is against your beliefs as it could be political opinions, it could be opinions related to, maybe they find out, Caleb, that, your colleague is a Yankees fan. How are you going to deal with that? I'm not going to take that kindly.
Right. So you could end up in the situation where it's like the opposite, right? Maybe somebody's an excellent behavior analyst, but because they're a Yankees fan and we are Red Sox fans,
exactly,
we don't give them a fair shot, or we think we think poorly of them.
Yeah, you think we're going to invite a Yankees fan on this podcast? Yeah, think again.
Oh yeah, we never asked them what baseball teams they.
Yeah, and that was on purpose. That was us being safe.
That's right. We don't want to know people's what if they're fans of any specific teams before coming on the podcast, because we could end up not inviting some people.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to tell you about how these conversations have affected my opinion on whether things can be handled online or in person the same way.
Right. That was a big question, right? You weren't convinced that they were any different. Were you convinced?
Okay, so totally 100% convinced, no. However, I will say that I thought that the conversations led me to think a lot more about setting myself up for success in this way, which is that preventatively we should do all the heavy lifting. And it seems like this was, if we think back to way back in episode 1, when we talked to Paula Braga-Kenyon, we talked about how she, when thinking about gifts and things like this, having some policy about whether something is a gift is a good way as a preventative measure. And so I think there are a lot of things we can do as preventative measures that keep us from getting in these dual relationships. And that's probably the best thing to do.
Right. There's the prevention. And then, I mean, I think what goes along with that too is training, right? I think it was Megan that talked about they would give staff members training on like don't post about work online. if you had a bad day at work, don't say that. Just as a way of, promoting a good professional image.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that goes along with what Dr. Paulo was saying at the first episode too, which is they do a lot of trainings on these as a preventative measure.
Yeah.
So we can have, and we should have trainings on what are our policy on gifts, what are our policy on the use of punishment, what is the policy on social media. This goes a long way, I think. So I was most convinced by Amanda's mention of, is it a smart thing to do? So when I think, okay, should I accept these friend requests from people that I work with, that people I might consult with, whether they're teachers or whether they're teachers' assistants or their thing, I'm not directly supervising them, but I consult with them and things like this. I thought it was great to point out that, is it unethical? You'd probably get differing opinions on that, but is it a smart thing to do? That's, that kind of puts me in a little bit of a different place. So,
okay. So you've been swayed, not convinced, but you feel like you have a different opinion now about,
yeah, I think that I'm a little different than I was before.
Okay.
And a thing that Amanda mentioned also is that, like, I think we've talked about this before. If you find yourself in what you think is maybe you've thought about and you think, oh, this is maybe a dual relationship of some sort, this is an unethical situation, you have to be able to go back and fix it. You have to be able to deal with it and you have to manage it. And you have to have the soft skills to talk to someone once you feel like this relationship is changing into something that might be a dual relationship. So do you have the confidence to reset the relationship? And that's a hard thing to do. So this is why prevention is really important.
Right. What we've been talking about up until this point is a lot of the considerations ethically with individual relationships, but we also talked to our guests about groups, right? So there's a ton of considerations when you think about being parts of online professional groups.
Yeah.
I think we kind of use the example of ABA study groups online.
That's right. Amanda mentioned that there are concerns with that too that I hadn't thought about. So, you remember what she talked about?
No.
Well, let me remind you. She mentioned that it's hard to make a distinction between who's an expert and who's not in the ABA study groups.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I get what you're saying, where it's like, if you're going to get a resource from somebody, then it should be, part of me wants to say, like, well, if you're getting a resource, then it almost like doesn't matter who it comes from. And what I mean by that is, if you say, I need an article, does anybody have like any recent literature on this thing? And you get a link to JABA, like 2015 paper on that thing.
Sure.
Like, does it matter who gave it to you? Or does it matter like that you get like a good resource? Versus, I think what she mentioned was like, if somebody gives you a description, do you actually know that came from Cooper, or is it just somebody's opinion?
Right. Yeah. And I think that's true. And that should be, but this is a little bit of nuance here, which is that you can get peer-reviewed resources from someone who's not an expert, but the resources themselves are peer-reviewed. But if someone's making up,
that's right.
If someone's making up a mock exam and we're not really sure who they are, or a test question, and they're like, hey, answer my test question. Do you know who this person is? Is this person an expert? Is the definition that you see in the comments, are those actually experts talking? Or is that just someone who decided they were going to offer up something for other people to like?
That's right. So if you were really looking to get some resources or
guidance on a topic, you really should probably directly message somebody who you know is an expert.
Yeah. And I think that goes along with what Amanda said, which is like find the experts and then take it offline. The social media groups are a good place to find experts, a good place to look for and kind of crowdsource these peer-reviewed resources, maybe books, maybe articles, maybe podcasts, but you might want to find the expert that you're looking for and then take the conversation offline, or maybe not offline, but like off of public space, right?
And I mean, what Megan said that I thought was a good point was, if you are going to be asking a question in these groups, keep it kind of broad, right? And I think this kind of ties into what we were saying, like rather than asking a question about a specific client, ask a more broad question about maybe a topic and kind of try to get some resources, right? Like some journal articles or other helpful resources that are high quality.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the same time, I think that puts the people who are responding to the question in a better position where they're not being asked to possibly offer up advice on a specific client.
That's right. Yeah, we want to help each other out and make it more likely that the people that are responding to us are doing it in an ethical way too. Right? So there's a way that we can preventatively ask questions we can ask for peer-reviewed research articles, or we can ask for the best published material. And so that's, a great point.
I think a final point on this, like the online communities and behavior analysis and those sort of interactions, a great consideration that we actually didn't even point out in this episode until Megan brought it up was that in the ethical code 8.0, it talks about how posting on social media when talking about behavior analysis is a public posting.
That's right. Yeah, I thought that was a great point.
And what comes along with that is an obligation to behave a certain way in those interactions.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we want to behave professionally and we want to behave ethically, and that puts a little bit of extra pressure on us to do that, right? The having something like directly tied to the ethical compliance code makes it like, all right, it's like it's not just a recommendation from your friends at the Functional Relations podcast. It's like, oh yeah, this is written in by the BACB.
Yeah, and I think with that being said, it's important that when we're interacting with each other professionally online in these groups, that we're being mindful of maybe the way our comments are coming across, right?
Yeah.
Maybe like the types of feedback and the way we're delivering that feedback.
Yeah, that was something I really appreciated about Dr. Megan Miller when she had this really nice way of saying that, there were times that she, a few years ago, she felt like she had been a little bit looser about the way that she interacted on social media. And then she mentioned how when they published that paper, she felt like maybe she went too far the other direction. And so she's now kind of coming to this middle ground, which I think she feels like is the best place to be. And I really appreciated her openness about that because it shows how people who are very well respected in the field still have to think about these things.
Yeah. I think that there's at least a couple reasons why this is important. One is that we want to support other professionals who are on these websites looking for support, right? But a second reason is that it's important to think about how our field is perceived from people outside the field, right? So we don't want to come across as being bitter towards other people or, coming across as maybe not compassionate to others. So I think it's all like perception too.
Yeah, I mean, who wants to be a part of a field when we're just like eating our own? You know what I mean? We're just like, this is a dog-eat-dog world, Caleb. The world of behavior analysis is vicious. It's like, no, we're in a social services field. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. We're trying to better the lives of others, and others in our field should be included in that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So one of the things thanks for bringing that up about the ethical code, because I thought that was a big, important piece. One of the things I wanted to do to kind of wrap up was to talk about how your process, because I feel like over the last few years, I've seen you develop this really strong process of being able to find literature that's valuable and like searching. I mean, you've been going through your PhD program, so I suspect this has been honed by your professors and your colleagues, but you have a really nice way of being able to find peer-reviewed literature that's important. And I thought maybe we could share a little bit about your process. Are you willing to do that?
Yeah, you're kind of putting me on the spot, but
all right. Well, here, let me start you out. So what's the first thing you do? You have this question, right?
Yeah, right. Or I should say a question or maybe a problem. Usually it's a problem.
Okay. All right. So let's say you have this problem. What's the first thing you do?
Usually I try to figure out what the key words would be.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. So if I'm going to go find an article, thinking about like, is it a specific treatment that I'm interested in? Is it a specific like function of problem behavior? Is it a particular skill? Like, is there a population that I'm trying to zero in on?
Okay, those are good.
Figuring that out.
Okay, so then you get these keywords. So maybe the keyword is autism, and it's self-injury, and it's attention maintained. Now what do you do?
I'd probably throw those keywords into Google Scholar.
Okay.
I always use Google Scholar.
Okay, that's a good. Yeah, I use Google Scholar a lot too, and that's a good resource. So you throw these keywords in. Anything else you throw in the search bar?
No, I mean, I'd probably just throw those in and see what happens.
Okay.
Because I think oftentimes what happens with me when I'm looking at literature is I'll put in like some keywords that I know are probably going to be part of what I find.
Uh-huh.
Right. So if I know that I'm looking for something with the example you just gave, like autism diagnosis, attention maintained, self-injury, like if I'm really committed to those, then I know that they're going to be part of it. And then I'll just see what that turns up. And usually that's when that'll take me like down the rabbit hole.
Okay. Yeah. Something I do on occasion is if I think that I'm looking for like an article that's like a seminal article related to this topic, I'll type in JABA. If you just type JABA as a keyword in there, JABA articles come up.
Oh, I do that too.
Yeah. So then,
I usually do
maybe
JABA too. Yeah.
Maybe the word behavior or behavior analysis, throw that on the end. That helps. You get a bunch of results, and then what do you do?
So what you just mentioned is seminal articles. So I think that can be helpful. So if you can find an article in that list that pops up that you recognize, for instance, if it was an article that was published in JABA like 20 years ago, that was one of like the seminal articles on the treatment of self-injury maintained by attention with kids with autism. Usually then it'll say right below that, cited by, and it'll give you a number of the number of articles that have cited that.
Yeah.
Then you're in business, because then you see like all the literature that's been done to extend that seminal article.
Yeah, so that's like that's the real rabbit hole right there. The search results are kind of, you got halfway, you got to get the right keywords, but then if you find an article that you're like, oh, this is exactly what I'm looking for, you look right underneath, cited by, has all those descriptions. It limits it from whatever the 150,000 articles, right, to like, okay, we got 50 articles on the topic, and those are the ones that have cited this article. I think that's a good process.
Hey everyone, if you've been listening to this whole episode and you're interested in getting ethics CEs, the third and final code word is art. Art. I went to the museum to check out some new art that was on display. Art. A-R-T. Art. When you finish the episode, head over to functionalrelationspodcast.com to purchase the 2 ethics CEs for this episode.
if other people have questions about this process or whatever, they can, send us an email, because I think is a really important thing. If we want people to be able to actually use peer-reviewed research and use it in the way that we're talking about, we need to have it be as little amount of effort as possible. And so this is our process. I'm sure you guys have your own, but I wanted to wrap up with that. Is there anything else you want to talk about, Caleb?
No, I think that's it. I think we've had some good conversation on this topic, and I thought it was just great to have our guests on and be able to share their perspectives.
Yeah, me too. And so anyway, so to wrap up, I guess, guys, thanks for listening. And if you want CEs for this particular podcast, it's going to be 2 CEs. You can jump on our website, functionalrelationspodcast.com, or if you want to support us, you can go to patreon.com/functionalrelationspodcast and support us there. Thanks for all of your time, and we'll see you in 2 weeks with episode 6.